I honestly don't even know how to start this podcast because you and I have so much energy around today's topic. So it is guaranteed to be juicy. And honoring the fact that it's been a couple weeks. If we ever go dark on the podcast, it's typically because we're brewing up something that is absolutely so massive and so golden and so delicious. And today's the day. Today's the day that we're going to bring to the light something that is very near and dear to us. And there will be no surprises, I don't think, in this podcast, in the fact that we have talked about a lot of these concepts over the past, I don't know, 60, 70 podcast episodes that we've recorded, but it has all just kind of formulated so beautifully into the structure and the framework that we're going to talk about today that like we may die on this hill. And it's just in time for spooky season. So it's middle of October upon the recording of this. And we are moving into Halloween. We're moving into Scorpio season. So we're going to play with some of those darker aspects in what we're going to talk about today, which is the villain's code. And it may just be the most important podcast that we've ever recorded because it's going to be so potent. It's going to be so impactful and it's going to be so actionable that you can walk away from this podcast, implement your new villain era, and see immediate results in your business and your life. And I'm just so excited to talk about it today.
I would be happy to live and die on this hill with you. There is so much energy around this. And I think the first thing that we get to cover is what the villain code is, more about the villain archetype. The nature of archetypes is that they're primarily undefinable, but they have like these like little parameters that you can look at the world through. And so a good example that people are familiar with is the archetype of the queen. When I say queen to you, you get a very specific image. Maybe it's an old lady in England, maybe it's the evil queen from Snow White, but the archetype of the queen comes in different forms. There's the ice queen. She is an archetype that lives within the mother archetype of the queen. There's the queen of hearts. There's the warrior queen. There are all these different iterations of an archetype. I say that because the villain archetype has been portrayed to us in a very specific way. And we need to disconnect a little bit from what we think of when we think of villain, because right now I say villain and you immediately go bad guy. And that is not what we're doing here today. We are going to use the villain archetype to empower you, to ensure that you have a sense of precision and stability in the way that you move through the world, a sense of integrity and sacredness. But we're not going to use it to intentionally hurt people. And we're not going to use it to demean people or as permission to spew our shadows and our baggage and our trauma out onto the world. And so I think we're going to start by defining a little bit better what we mean when we say the villain archetype.
We are. And one of the things that I want the listener to recognize is that if you're here, if you're listening to this podcast, whether you listen to the Mobile Bev Pros podcast or our Crowns and Chaos podcast, you are already a villain. You're already a villain in the way that we're going to describe it because you are working to step outside of what is commonly accepted, what is commonly comfortable, the norm. If you wanted to be normal, you would probably be an accountant at a day job and typing away on your computer 8 hours a day, taking your lunch break for 45 minutes, working the 9 to 5 or the 8 to 4 with your 14 days off a year. You're not. If you're here, that's not you. That doesn't describe you. You've decided you want to be your own boss or that you don't want to lead like other people led you, that you want to be bigger, a version of yourself that is bigger, that maybe pushes back against the narratives in society. Our definition of villain is someone who's willing to stand up to society and say, the way that you're doing it is not right for me. That is not my value set. And it's going to look a little extreme as to how I'm going to show up in the world. And that might make you uncomfortable. You might have words to say. You're going to judge potentially. You're going to have to sit with your big feels about the way that I'm showing up because it isn't exactly what you would do or what my parents said I should do. That is the villain. The villain is someone who's willing to do the hard thing, even when the rest of society is saying, no, not that way. Not that way. That's too loud. It's too much. It's too big. It's too far. That's what we're going to talk about today.
And I love the way that you just described that. I think that gives people a really good idea of what it looks like. We're talking about like the ultimate rebel archetype, having the balls to go against societal norms, your own conditioning. That's what we're going to get into when we start giving you the villain code. And we are going to give you the villain code today so that you can walk away and start powerfully implementing a lot of these concepts in your life. But when we give it to you, you're going to find that you're disrupting your own codes first. And that then you're disrupting societal codes. And potentially, one could even go so far as to say that disrupting our own codes is disrupting societal codes, because societal norm is to just like numb, take prescriptions, like be quiet, do what you're told. And the process of digging through your own stuff is kind of radical. I mean, it's getting more normalized now, but it hasn't always.
The mere concept of becoming an entrepreneur demonstrates a lot of the pieces that we're going to talk about. And the entrepreneurs that are listening to this podcast, or the leaders that have big teams that are listening to this podcast, they're potentially going to hear the villain code and recognize an inner longing. They're like, oh, I want to be like that. Oh, I want to, but I can't. Or, someone's told me that's not the right way to be. And like, this is your invitation to heed that call. If you hear the villain code and you're like, oh, that's so yummy, that feels so freeing and so naughty, your villain era is calling. And so don't suppress that urge. If you get the little fire in your belly after listening to this, there's something in here for you. And we actually have some action steps that you can take.
Inner longing is such a delicious way to describe that, because it like reverberates through your bones. When you hear these things, it like lights a fire, or potentially just uncovers a fire that has always been burning. I think that one of the most profound shifts for me was when I started to understand the supreme integrity of the villain archetype. If you think about like Darth Vader, he has a goal: dominate the galaxy. And you have a goal: make $1 million, make $200,000, replace your day job, right? You have a goal. And when we work with entrepreneurs and we're like pushing them, supporting them to new heights, they have all these stories about why they can't get where they want to go. I'm a procrastinator. I'm unorganized. It's really hard for me to focus. I just have too much going on, poor time management. I'm not prioritizing my health, all these things. And I just want you to imagine for a minute walking into Darth Vader's lair and seeing like open bags of Doritos all over the place. Like his bed isn't made. He's like lounging in a chair, like not wearing his helmet. And he's like, I'll take over the galaxy tomorrow. Like today, I just didn't feel like it. The villain calls us to supreme integrity. And that, at the end of the day, is what everybody's actually longing for. And so we're going to give it to you through the dark archetype, like how delicious. But what you're actually craving is your own integrity. What you're actually craving is being in alignment with your own rules and your own laws and your own values, being aligned and precise about your vision in the world, your life's intention. That's what you're longing for. It's just easier, I think, for us to give this medicine through like mythology. I mean, that's the purpose of lore. That's the purpose of parable, is that it teaches you on a level that me just saying, here's a checklist of items, can't teach you. And that's the other thing about the villain, too, that I'll say here, is that the villain calls the hero, if you've ever noticed, the villain calls the hero to levels of himself, herself, that she could have never reached just under her mentorship or just in her hometown where she lived comfortably. Her mentors teach her, but the villain helps her evolve. And that's a totally different ball game. And so your own inner villain can help you evolve in ways that mindset gurus and positive affirmations just could never.
Right, because the hero needs the villain to oppose them. It's that opposition of the villain that gives the hero something to overcome. And also, one thing that I've noticed in my research into the villain archetype is that the villain is almost always trying to make big change. It's trying to shake up the status quo, whereas often the hero is trying to maintain the status quo. And some of my favorite novels, fantasy books are the ones where the villain actually turns out to be like the person who's trying to make the change that is really necessary. That like there's all these oppressed groups that it's like the main character is always like, oh my gosh, yes, this is awful. Why do we do it this way? Meanwhile, the villain is the one that's been like trying to overthrow this oppressive regime the entire time. And like we are our own oppressive regime. We are where we are right now because we're following all the rules and the patterns and the stories that we have established and claimed. And then we look outside of that and we're like, man, I really wish that I could accomplish that thing. Well, you'd have accomplished that thing if you didn't have your oppressive regime in place. You have to overthrow your own oppressive regime, and you can't do that as the hero of the oppressive regime. You have to bring in the villain to get that job done. And so that's what we're doing today.
Yeah, the other thing that they do is they take really good care of themselves and of their space, of their environment. Like they're really careful about their bodies and about their temples and their lair where they reside, right? Because they know that to do big work in the world, they have to have their shit together. And so many of us just want to have our shit together. Like imagine Maleficent with poor posture. You wouldn't. And so we want to call on that inner villain, not just to make radical change like in the external circumstances, but radical change in the self, to your point, overthrowing your internal oppressive regime. And so now we're going to dive into the villain code. We're going to start giving you the laws we've established thus far to make and create change and connect with your own inner villain.
Yeah. So when you and I were like, how do we birth this into the world? How do we bring this to people so that it makes sense? Obviously, how we do that is we create a little bit of structure for that. And it just inherently, we're like, the villain code. What does it mean? What does it look like to be our version of a villain? Because there's lots of versions out there that we do not subscribe to. There's lots of villains that are out there in the world. We're like, not that one, not that one. We do not claim that villain. We claim these villains, and they live by this code. The first code I'll give you is the last one that I wrote down, actually. And that is radical self-acceptance. And I'm leading with this one because I love the way you described it right before we got on the call.
Yeah, radical self-acceptance is the process of embracing your own darkness. And right now, we have a movement in the spiritual communities, the religious communities, where we are moving, and potentially it's always been this way, but they're asking you to move from shadow to light. Now, shadow is like, I'm hiding the truth from myself and from everyone around me. No one can tell that my subconscious programming is keeping me small. That's shadow. Like we can see it. You're naked. We can see it. When we move from shadow to light, we start changing things about ourselves. This is the process of healing or fixing yourself. I have so much work to do on myself. And so we move into the light and we say, I hate this thing about me. I'll make a change and it's unsustainable. And it's like that diet you keep having to go on, right? It's like that commitment that you keep having to make that you're going to run a mile every morning and you just don't. That's because it's not sustainable to move from shadow to light and hold it for an extended period of time, because light is actually quite inauthentic. You're trying to make change without acknowledging all the layers involved. And the darkness is that truth. And we'll get to telling the truth is one of the villain codes. We will get to that as well. But it's radical truth, radical self-honesty, and it's an accepting of the aspects of yourself that you've been trying to repress and then through the light trying to change. So yeah, you're going to create change, but the change that you create is that you're becoming more of who you always were. When we ask you to move from shadow to light in the spiritual community, what we're asking you is to be something that you're not, to like live up to an ideal version of yourself that you or someone else has created. When we move from shadow to darkness, we're asking you to become more of yourself and to unleash what has always been there without shame and without needing to fit into someone else's model of what you should be.
We talk about acceptance in the last Crowns in Chaos podcast. I think maybe it wasn't the last one, but it was the last for the archetype series that we did, where we talk about acceptance as part of moving through that. And it's not different here. The thing is that a lot of times with the love, light, laugh, live, laugh, love, woo, spiritual community, positive thoughts only type thing, like they're asking you to live in the light, right? Positive thoughts. Oh, you feel sad today? Just think happy thoughts. Oh, you've been down in the dumps? Gratitude. Gratitude's great. All those things are great. But to your point, they're all temporary because you're having to keep bringing yourself out of the shadow, bringing yourself out of the shadow. Whereas when you lean into the dark, you can say things about yourself, or you can acknowledge things about yourself in that, I don't know, I have a drinking problem. Oh, okay. That's big. Yeah, but I'm not going to work on that right now because I've got other things that I want to do in the world. And so I'm just going to move through the world with this drinking problem and I'm going to achieve big things. Okay. You can do that. Whereas in the live, laugh, love community, you got to like, they're looking at it all the time, all the things about yourself, your healing, your childhood trauma, your depression, your anxiety. Now you have ADHD, which is like explaining away why you have a hard time focusing, but like now you still got to get shit to do, right? There's all of that noise. And in the villain code with radical self acceptance, we get to say, okay, so what? We get that about you. You've got like shadows, and we're just going to love that about myself for now. I'm coming in hot to accomplish big things with all of this stuff that eventually I will likely unpack and that will get changed, but that's not going to keep me from making big moves right now. I accept me as I am and all my imperfections right now, and I'm not going to keep myself small until I fix those things either. That's just who I am right now. And that piece of me, it might be ugly, it might be villainous, but she's fucking powerful.
Yeah, for me, this brings up the alchemical process. When you look at transmutation or transformation through an alchemical process, we're taking base metals like lead, iron, and we're turning them into gold. And the Love and Light crew is telling you it's gold, it's gold, it's gold, it's gold, it's gold, it's gold. No, it's lead. In the dark, we're honest. You have a hunk of lead. And the only way, this is the irony of it, the only way you can actually change the lead is to understand the lead. If you don't have a base understanding of how this metal works, you damn sure can't change it into some other metal. And so we don't want you out here doing positive affirmations and going, this lead is gold, this lead is gold, this lead is gold, all the while you're walking around with a hunk of lead. No, you want to be honest. And this is where the feminine comes in. You want to be truthful. No, I have a hunk of lead. You can't change a problem that you don't fully understand. And so when we're in radical self acceptance, it's a process of understanding ourselves, of coming to terms with ourselves, of getting clear. So many women, they come into containers with us and they say, I love my work, but da 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 da. And like that preface, that like silver lining that they feel the need to add, that's not you allowing yourself to just feel the depths of whatever it is, rage, grief, sadness, whatever you're working with. In radical self acceptance, we get into the heart of the problem. We understand the chemical composition of lead because we understand that we can't change it to gold if we don't know how to work with lead.
So our first villain code is that you accept yourself, radical self-acceptance, exactly the way that you are right now. That's required. The next thing that we have here is, and you referenced it, so I'm going to move on to that one next, is radical truth and radical honesty. And we've been playing with this truth versus honesty for a hot minute now. And I'm going to let you actually explain the difference between the two, because it's like, I think that if there's one golden nugget people take away from this, that's like something that they can immediately just go and implement, with the understanding that with the villain code, you might be like, but villains lie, not our villain, because our villain has nothing to hide. Okay. And so oftentimes, if not always, when you lie about a thing, it's because you don't feel safe to be honest about it. You don't feel safe being authentic. And it comes from a place of trying to manage the thoughts and feelings and perceptions of other people. And if you wanted to look up a word to define that, that's manipulation. And while we certainly could use that tool, there's really no need, because a villain has nothing to hide. A villain has no reason to not feel safe with the truth. And oftentimes, some of my favorite villains are the ones that tell the hard truths no matter what. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's so rude. That's so, but it's the freaking truth, right? And so that's why they're villainized, is because they're willing to say the thing that everyone else is ignoring and no one else is looking at. And that makes them villainous. But the villain in our storybook and our lore here, radical truth and radical honesty.
Yeah, they crucified Christ because he was a villain to the Roman Empire. like he was radical. And it wasn't until like way after his birth and death story that he became this like hero of the Christian church. But prior to that, he was demonized because he was going against the grain and he was saying the thing that no one wanted to hear. He was disruptive. The nature of the villain is disruptive. The difference between honesty and truth has been profound for me. Honesty is vulnerability in its highest. And I don't want to negate it. It's so very important. You go to therapy or you go to counseling and you're honest about how you feel. Honesty includes what I think about a thing, what potentially caused this thing. So we're talking about like maybe childhood trauma or that one memory you have of like second grade, whatever. We're talking about our feelings that makes me feel sad or wounded or abandoned. We're talking about our thoughts around it, our judgments. I think that makes them a bad person, or I think they should behave in this way. Those are being honest. That's the first layer of self acceptance and of acceptance of others and sovereignty to some degree as well. It's the first layer of really getting to know yourself, is being honest. The problem with honesty is that after you've released it, after you've said it to the world, now we're just rehashing and re traumatizing with that story. And you'll find often that couples who are honest with each other make no forward momentum because they're both just slinging their feelings at each other. Okay, there's a lot of vulnerability going on here. Thank you for being honest, but no forward momentum can come. Truth, you've landed on truth. One, because it includes no thoughts and no feelings, it just simply is fact. But two, there's a next step and it's clear, it's obvious. As soon as you name the truth, the next step becomes blazingly obvious. And so villains oftentimes tell the truth. Honesty is important. Keep that in your pocket. Honesty can look like, I feel bad about my weight and I overeat. And I think that comes from like when I was a kid, like I wasn't allowed to have sweets in the house. And so I would hide them from my parents. And now that I'm an adult, like I have this sugar tooth and I feel terrible about myself. And I think I'm a slob, but I can't stop. Sugar has such a hold on me. That's honesty. And it's so beautiful. There's no next step. The truth is, I buy sweet items, they reside in my home, and I choose them. Okay, cool. That's the truth. What's the next step? Stop fucking buying those sweet items and don't eat them. We can be in honesty and still be a slave to something. That thing can still have power over us, even in honesty. When we're truthful, we retain sovereignty because I'm in control here. I have the power to stop this process and make a different choice.
Or not stop it, right? That's that radical self-acceptance. I love sweets. I have a whole story because I know society says I shouldn't. I eat too many of them, but fucking I love it. I love it. Oh, you drink too much caffeine. Yes, I do. I will drink coffee 2 cups every day. Oh, but you really should have one. I should, shouldn't I? I'm gonna have two because I love it, right? And that's a self-acceptance. That's radical self-acceptance and telling the truth in that this is what I do. Blink, blink.
I think too, this brings up a level of self-punishment that a lot of people have when they have shame around a thing, or society says I shouldn't like sugar. Society says I shouldn't have 2 cups of coffee. They like self-punish. And that can be subconscious. Like you give yourself headaches, you hold on or retain weight that would otherwise not be there. It can be subconscious and live in the body, but it can also come out in their words where they're like trying to justify. They're like, oh, but my body processes caffeine way better than most people. You don't need any of that. You don't need any of the stories. You don't have to justify anything. And I think in the villain doesn't self-punish for pleasure and doesn't self-punish for their choices. They make the choice, they own the choice, and they don't have to justify the choice to fucking anybody.
100%. The next part of the villain's code is radical integrity. And oftentimes integrity is assigned to us. Society has decided that this is what the moral code looks like. And if you're outside of this, you're out of integrity. If you're inside of this, you're in integrity, right? Religions have this with their 10 commandments or whatever it is that they prescribe to keep people in line with the value set of that religion. The villain is going to say, I set the values here. What I decide is the code, is how I'm going to live. But they don't then self abandon and self sacrifice those values. They establish what's important to them, the hills that they're going to die on, they hold them sacred, and everything else gets sacrificed at the altar of the values that they have selected. Even when it pisses other people off, even when it's coloring outside the lines of society. And within radical integrity, it might look like I have a glass of bourbon every night, but I have just one. I can stop myself. I love a good piece of cake, but just one, because I know that my body is my temple and I'm okay enjoying the things that I appreciate in the world, but I'm not going to overindulge because it's important to me to take care of that which is mine, my body, my resources, my energy, my money. All of these things enable me, the villain, to execute my big plans. And so I'm not going to do anything to compromise my work in the world.
We see this show up with people who lack boundaries with themselves and with others. And this came up today because we had a call with a woman who is doing the big work. And she had mentioned how hard it is for her to define a reward for herself when she accomplishes a big goal. She's an entrepreneur and she feels like accomplishing the goal is the reward. And she is just going to give herself whatever she wants anyway. So it's hard to say, like, I'll buy that purse as a reward when if she wants the purse, she's just going to buy the purse. And you had a really beautiful expansion that you offered her on that.
What you're referencing at the end of our weekly check-ins and check-outs, when someone checks in, I ask the question, if you accomplish all your goals, what are you going to give yourself as a reward? And the reason that I put that in there is there's a number of different reasons. One of those reasons is that the human brain, likes to work towards a thing. The other reason is that positive reinforcement. The other reason is that as entrepreneurs, we can just keep grinding away, never actually stopping and rewarding ourselves for that work or seeking external validation, meaning I only feel good about the work that I do in the world when someone tells me I've done a good job or they leave a good review or someone says how proud they are of me. That's all external stuff. And so this is an opportunity for you to say, this is what's important to me. I'm going to assign myself a goal. And if I achieve the thing that I said that I want to achieve, I'm going to reward myself with this thing. Problem is that I don't think people are very used to that framework. And so oftentimes we'll get, oh, I'll take a bath, or I will go out to dinner with my husband, or like, I don't want you withholding dinner with your husband if you don't achieve your work in the world. Like, that's not where we're going with this. And I reference this piece of art, which listeners can't see. I bought this piece of art in 2022. And the goal was, if I made my business sales goal, I was going to buy this piece of art. And it was the most expensive piece of art I've ever purchased. It was only a couple $100, but still, I'm a beginner in art. And I really wanted that piece of art. And so I pulled every sales lever that I had in order to achieve my sales goals. I exceeded my sales goals and I bought that piece of art, and I love that piece of art. Not only did I love it originally, but I love it even more now because I worked to achieve it. And with entrepreneurship, we oftentimes will just keep moving the goalpost and without any markers. And those little things actually psychologically make a big difference. And so creating rewards and only letting yourself have them if you actually earn them is good for us in business and in life, because it gives us something to work towards, and then it provides us a reward for getting there. If you're just giving yourself stuff all the time, anytime, whenever you want it, there's no discipline there.
Yeah, the other side of this coin is abstaining from vices or building the fires of willpower, right? As fire keepers, we don't just expect will to show up whenever it wants. We recognize that will has to be tended to. And so to create self-trust, to be in integrity with our word, with our actions, with our big vision, a tool that we can use is 30 days of no insert vice here. And you just commit to that and you go all in on it to prove to yourself, one, that you can do it, You can do hard things. Two, that you can hold integrity. Three, that your word means the world to you, right? Because a lot of us are really good at keeping our word to other people. We're shit at keeping our word to ourselves. 30 days of keeping your word to yourself. So, yeah, I'm giving up ice cream. It's not about the ice cream. It's 30 days of me doing what I said I was going to do, right? Come hell or high water. 30 days of walking to move my body. It's not really about it is about walking and moving your body, but it's not really about moving your body. It's about 30 days of me doing what I said I was going to do. And you can go 60 days. You get to 30 days and then you want to go 60, right? And so pick a vice and abstain from it. And this will help you on a subconscious level start to really understand what it looks like to be in integrity with your own values, with your own word, the actions that you're taking when no one's looking, when there's no reward centers being lit up, when it just sucks to not be able to eat sugar. Commit to yourself, and then you'll start to have a deeper understanding of what it looks like to be in radical integrity.
If we wanted to get into the buzzwords that are really hot in the mindset space here, we see integrity and the lack of radical integrity when we hear things like, oh, lack of boundaries, or if you have this crippling anxiety before going into a meeting, or if someone drops you a text or an email that's like, can you come see me? And you're like, "Ugh." That reaction is because you don't trust yourself to show up for yourself in those heavy moments. And when you practice radical integrity, you can then walk into any room without knowing what's going to go on and know that you've got your back because you can trust yourself to show up for your own best interest. You can trust yourself to do the hard thing. You can trust yourself to say the thing that is in alignment with your own value set without worrying that you're going to have to sacrifice your values, you're going to have to bend to someone else's will. And ultimately, maybe you will have to do a thing you don't want to do, but it won't be because you had to sacrifice your values to get there. You'll be able to say, well, I don't really love that, but I will do it in the sake of whatever you've decided. Maybe I want to maintain this relationship. And so to honor that relationship, I'm happy to make this concession. But like you've been heard, and you can then say, I value myself for standing up for myself. Practicing radical integrity leaks out into all areas of your life, not just what you eat after dinner or what you allow yourself to do when no one else is looking. You hold yourself differently. You trust yourself more, and you will always have your own back.
We see people struggle with self abandonment issues or lack of boundaries, lack of self integrity when it comes to pricing. As soon as they get pushback for pricing, they're taking it personally. They're fretting over the conversation. They feel betrayed. They feel unworthy. They're like, how could they? What am I going to say when I get on this call? Like, how do I justify my prices? When you are in radical integrity and you have practiced the art of not self abandoning, i.e., cut out a vice for 30 days, like you've given yourself that space to trust yourself and to have your own back, then when people question your prices, like that's a them thing. And it doesn't even like take up space for you. I mean, you handled this beautifully the other day. We had somebody who reached out and was like, hey, I'm super annoyed by the level of follow up I'm getting from emails. And so I don't think this program is going to be a good program for me. And the way you responded was glorious. You were like, that's a great decision because we are going to teach you to follow up to secure the bag. you know, and you weren't bothered by that at all. Like you just said what you needed to say. Now, that person did come back and they were like, oops, you're right, my bad, which is what happens often when we're in integrity is that we shine a light on people's shadows. When you're in integrity, other people are like, whoa, that's intense. And even the accelerators were like, I wish that I had the words like you do for like these tough conversations, like what to say. And you had mentioned to me the other day, you were like, really, it's just a practice of like, I've been the villain for so long. Like, I'm willing to stand up for myself. I believe in what I'm doing. I'm comfortable and confident in my prices. I'm comfortable and confident in the services that I offer. And so there is no waver within me when someone else questions that value because I'm secure in my value. It doesn't have anything to do with them. And I just thought that was absolutely beautiful.
That reminds me, I jotted down a number of things about the villain era as to like, what can you expect? What is gonna, if you show up as the villain, like, what's the outcome? And I just wrote down a bunch of things that I think people oftentimes will reflect back to me where they're like, I wish I had more of that. So I'll just read them off. One is confidence. The villain has nothing if not confidence. To your point, if Maleficent was slouching, would you take her seriously? You can see in someone's body language how they hold themselves, whether or not they're confident or not. Even if they're just feigning confidence, we actually know brain science, you standing up straight makes you more confident. Like chicken or egg, I don't care. I don't care. So confidence is one of those things. Discipline is another one, right? Because if you're the villain, we've already talked about that. The third one is resilience. Like the villain is gonna fail. Have you ever seen how many times the coyote doesn't catch the roadrunner? You're just gonna fail. And eventually you're gonna succeed, but you're gonna fail a lot on the way there. And you just keep getting up and doing it again. And that's resilience. The fourth thing here is strength, physical strength. Yes. Mental strength. Yes. Emotional strength. Yes. All the strengths, because nothing can keep you down. And some of that is resilience, but strength in the fact that like, you're just going to keep doing what you need to do and you're going to get stronger as you do it. And then I have leadership here because do you know a villain that people aren't willing to follow? Name a villain, they got a posse back there and they have to know how to lead that posse. You can't be a villain and be like, I don't really know what I need you to do for me. And you can't be a villain without trusting the people around you to do the work that they're doing. You need a team of people to help you. And so if you're a business owner out there and you are getting into your villain era and you're like, I can't trust other people to do the work like I do it. Leadership is a must for your villain era. And then the last thing is consistency. If you're showing up for yourself one day and not showing up for yourself the next day, and like that's inconsistent. The villain is always there for themselves, always there for their mission more than anything else. You don't skip leg day when you're a villain. You need those things. And I kind of referenced this one earlier in the fact that villains are making big change. You can't be a villain and have no plan. You can't be a villain and not know where you're going. You can't be a villain and not have a mission, right? So a villain has a radical plan. It's not, I'm going to do the same thing that everyone else is doing. That's boring. And that's more of the same. And that would just not be villainous. The villain is like, the version of the world or the version of business or the version of the thing that I'm experiencing or I see is not in alignment with my value set and it's not enough. I want something different. And so I'm going to create a plan of a future, of a world, of a business that is not like what I'm seeing or what I have access to anywhere else. And if you are like, a business owner that just says, oh, I like what they're doing, I'm just going to do that. Not a villain, because at some point the market gets saturated or the economy goes down. What are you going to do? Because that was never your plan to begin with. So you're just following, right? A villain leads, a villain creates the plan. And it doesn't matter what happens, what the economy does, you are going to pivot, shift, and push forward. And you're going to have to create a new plan potentially. But a villain is always there for that ultimate master plan, no matter what happens, how they have to navigate around unforeseen circumstances, full speed ahead. The next one is going to be super familiar to everybody who listens because it is radical ownership. And I've been talking about this for years because I use the crown to represent this. The crown, radical ownership, indicates you're responsible for all the outcomes in your life, in your business, in your empire. Even when things go wrong that are outside of your control. I always give the example, like if you were running your own empire and there was a drought, would you just be like, well, I guess God wants us to die. Sorry for you guys. No, you're the king, queen of your empire. You got to figure that shit out. You got to make a plan. You got to execute the plan. You got to take ownership for the fact that your people are starving. Now, what are you going to do about it? When I say wear the crown, I think I want to be very careful in saying that I want you to utilize your personal power, not try and usurp the power of others. Because when we think of wearing the crown, oftentimes that is synonymous with like, I have power, right? Power over yourself, yes, check. Power or manipulation of others, no. That's not where we're going here. With the recognition that when you have an empire, a business, whatever it is, you're not always going to have peace and there will always be casualties despite your best efforts.
Yeah, the example that you used earlier was that we don't stop walking on the sidewalk because ants are on the sidewalk. We didn't stop making cars because of car accidents. There will be casualties in any innovation. And sometimes those casualties will be people that you thought were close to you, right? We've seen women who become radical and they leave their husbands. We see often business owners who become radical and close down one business altogether because they're like, actually, this was a copycat thing that doesn't nourish my soul and it's not in alignment at all with my values. And so there will be casualties, there will be sacrifices, but the villain knows what is sacred to them. And so they know what to sacrifice for, and they know when sacrifice is required.
The other example I'll give for casualties is this concept of competition, right? If you went into your villain era and you want to create this awesome business, and I've seen this sometimes in Facebook groups where they're like, I'm not trying to compete with local businesses. Why? Like competition, quote unquote, there is no such thing as competition in the fact that like you're going to do you, but there's a subset of people that are willing to pay for a product. And so if you are starting a new business, by default, you're taking business away from the businesses that are already serving that market somewhere else. Like you just have to own the fact that when you start a business, when you do a thing, that is going to encroach upon someone else's potential market. That's up to them how they deal with that. You are going to take radical ownership of your business and you're going to try and make it as big as possible and make as much money as possible and as profitable as possible. That's what you're going to do. And there will be some people out there who are like, you stole my market. Or I've seen like in food trucks, like I was the only hot dog stand and now there's another hot dog stand. And like, what would you do or say to that other hot dog? Nothing. You just go out and be better than they are, right? There will be casualties and people might blame you for it. That's on them, not on you. That's just the nature of the game. When you want to be big in the world, there's always going to be someone out there trying. It's like the crabs in the bucket, where if I don't know if people are familiar with that, but if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, crabs will try and climb out of the bucket and the other crabs will pull them down. That's just the nature of it. You got to ignore all of that noise. You have to recognize, yes, there'll be casualties. Yes, there'll be people in my family that don't like what I'm doing, that are going to be jealous of my success, that are going to tell stories about how I'm not taking care of the business they want me to take care of. They're going to have all those things. You're not spending enough time with your kids because now you got to go out and do events on the weekends, and all those stories will be there. There will be casualties. There are always sacrifices when you decide to do a thing. In the villain era, when you wear your crown, you own the fact that there will be casualties.
Yeah, and the last one I think bleeds beautifully into this, and it's radical action. Taking radical action. To sum it all up, the villain is going to do it anyway. That's what they're going to do. They're going to do it anyway. And so radical action comes from radical truth, which we spoke about earlier. It comes from radical ownership, recognition that there will be casualties. It comes from radical self-acceptance because then we can move in integrity. It comes from radical integrity, right? And so we take radical action, and that looks like the action that is the scariest for you is usually the action that produces the most results. And so if there's a thing in your business that you're terrified to do, if you're in resistance to sending follow-up emails because someone might email you and say that's annoying, that's the medicine. You need to send more follow-up emails, right? If you're in resistance to charging more, that's your medicine. You need to charge more. And not like, I just don't prefer that. I mean, resistance. Like somewhere in you, you're like, oh, I could never get those prices. That's so terrifying. Radical action is raising the prices because we know that the thing we desire is on the other side of the dragon. We have to confront the dragon to move on in the story. That's how you evolve quickly. You know what I mean? That's the difference between violent alchemy and gentle alchemy. Violent alchemy is taking radical action to just skip all the noise. Like, sure, you have all these stories around why you can't do what you want to do. The villain's going to fucking do it anyway.
Yeah, you mentioned where you have resistance. Another way to look at this is, where are you judging others? So if you're looking at someone saying, how on earth can they charge that? I can't believe they're charging that amount for what we do. That's for you. That's resistance right there. There's medicine in that. You ever look around and you start judging someone else for operating in a way that you're not operating, there's a villain opportunity for you right there. So radical action, we're talking about moving dirt, shifting air, burning down oppressive structures and systems to create the change that you want to see in the world. Not just talking about it, dreaming about it, planning about it, pontificating about it, actually going out there and making moves towards that master plan, that radical plan that you have for your life, your business, in the world at large.
Yeah, getting out of your head and taking the action and doing the inner work is fun and delicious. And it's what I create entire programs around. It's also never as potent as actually taking the action because you can sit and spiral in your thoughts and feel in honesty for forever and never actually move forward. And so we tell the truth, we take the next action. So this has been the villain code. Guys, this is our favorite topic. We will likely be diving deeper into this on the CNC podcast. If this landed for you, feel free to reach out to us on socials, send us an email, and let us know what landed and what you'll be taking away. Like what does your villain era look like? What is that thing for you? And we will be back with more of these. Sarah, thank you so much for hanging out with me. This has been absolutely delicious, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.